What's going on, everybody? Oh my goodness, one of my favorite streams that we do every year is the repurpose. Now, this was not being sold as a Christmas tree, okay? But it was being sold as a holiday living adornment, I believe was what the sign said. And I thought, blue rug juniper, beautiful, billowy. Let's take a look under the hood, and I saw a singular trunk in here with some zigs and some zags, and I said, this is interesting, right? Now, I'm just gonna lead with, I don't have a preconceived notion, but I have some hopes, right? I have some preconceived hopes for this thing. I'm hoping that this either gives us the chance to, number one, create a mame-sized kick-ass tree with a lot of deadwood, or number two, a literati Shohin piece. Okay, now this is just looking on the interior of this entire thing with its slender trunk and its what I would consider to be kind of rather awkward and angular movement. I think we might have some potential, all right? But before we really dig deep, before we go deep, I just want to say to everybody, last stream of 2022, it's been such a tremendous year of growth for us all. It's been, I think, a wonderful year of readjustment and sort of setting our intentions for the future. Mirai has progressed a lot over this year, done a lot of work in the wild. The live stream continues to be a community we all depend on, and we would not be here without you. So happy holidays to everybody. We wish you guys all the best. Find some time to be with family and the people that you love. And then come on back, because 2023, we're starting it off right. It's going to be an incredible year. And we're really looking forward to doing it again in even that better way, building on what we've learned and continuing to construct a phenomenal community with positivity that supports us all and keeps us moving forward. All right? If you haven't seen the Olives of Puglia Give Lively campaign, take a look at it. We need your help. There's sort of a ticking clock on that campaign as far as whether or not we're going to be able to accumulate the support to make it happen. We would love your help in making it happen. Take a look at bonsaimirai.com. It's on the very first slide of our homepage. Give Lively, see how you want to contribute to make us make that project happen. But other than that, let's see what we can do with our holiday adornment, blue rug juniper. Okay, it's tough to see in here, so I'm going to go ahead and do just a little bit of branch reduction. And when I'm cleaning out a juniper for the very first time, I want to be careful of the things that I remove. But this is where, if we've got something that has a tremendous number of branches, number one, if we have the options and the opportunity in terms of the tree, I want to be taking out things that are, one, dead or weak or not capable of being utilized on the interior. But I also want to be taking out things that exist on the inside of curves. Okay, and so what I'm working on here is just opening up some of the visibility of the movement that exists along the curvature of this tree, cleaning out those 1/4 to 1/8 inches on those first initiation of branches, but also cutting off some of the woody structure that exists inside of the interior portion of these curves. And it was, as I was looking, and we try to not spend, when we do these sort of repurposed holiday tree explorations, I try to not spend too much time conceptualizing what the tree will be. I really want it to be just a project where we get to have a lot of fun. Excuse me. A project where we get to have a lot of fun, where we get to enjoy the creative process together. We get to kind of discover this tree, but I do need some form of inspiration. I need something to motivate me to want to work with this. And the thing that motivated me here, and I'm about ready to just sort of I'm about ready to see if I can just kind of extend this. This is what motivated me. And I started thinking, oh my gosh, this is a darling little tree, has some fantastic opportunities. I don't know, is it going to be a Shohin? Is it going to be a mame? Could it be a literati? All of these things sort of undiscussed or undecided at this point in time, but there's clearly some potential that exists inside of this trunk here. Now, I want to be careful how much I'm moving this piece around too. Even though it's a piece of nursery stock, let me just get my tweezers here that are going to allow me to tease out the roots a bit. Even though it's a piece of nursery stock, this is a tree that was clearly up potted this year. Maybe something that came out of a liner pack. This is not a root-bound nursery stock piece, so the kind of techniques and the kind of execution that we apply to our root-bound nursery stock trees do not apply to this. So I want to be gentle. Now I can assume that this has been planted relatively deep, and already I'm kind of getting down into a much, much deeper root system down in the container, and I still have not hit any sort of foundation or formidable roots, right? And so as I start to look at this, I'm kind of thinking, okay, well, if I've got that much space, that means that I'm probably going to have a significantly straight section of that trunk. And this was what I thought I might encounter as we were looking at the material. And that's what kind of led me to think maybe we have the chance, maybe we have the opportunity to create a little bit of a literati vibe with a more elongated trunk in that very beginning portion. But I do think any way that we go about it, I feel like this piece has to come up, and this piece has to give us some sort of opportunity to create deadwood that's going to exist above the canopy of the tree. And there's a lot of really, really radical and interesting deadwood that we can make out of this piece, okay? So I don't necessarily, I guess we could think about, I'm just talking deadwood, there's like some opportunity here. Do we want to consider literati? Even this almost doesn't even feel like we have the necessary potential to pursue literati. Let's just see if we feel like we have any opportunity here. Now there's an interesting perspective of the front that exists right in here. Can you see that there, Lonnie? Is that a little dark? Pretty dark. We can see it though. Okay, this gives us an opportunity as well. I don't want to look past this. Even though I'm like pushing the deadwood vibe pretty extensively, I don't want to look past what exists right here. Is there some sort of potential opportunity that we could take advantage of? Do I want to wire this piece up and create deadwood out of that really slender piece? Is there anything up in here that I could utilize to create any sort of living tissue? Now the branching quality is not that great up here. I still look down here at the base and I'm like, branching quality at the base looks very high. Branching quality on both of these pieces looks relatively low. If I want to create a small tree or a proportional tree to the material that we've got here, I think I'm going to turn both of these into deadwood, and I think I'm going to wire them together so that I can actually give contour to that deadwood and see what we eventually will be able to hold. Now, wiring deadwood together and wiring shape into deadwood does not necessarily hold that deadwood in place. Deadwood will dry. It'll seem like it's held in place. You take the wire off and it'll slowly return to its original position. And this is really where heat plus holding that shape that exists in those branches is absolutely necessary. Now, I like steam a lot as a very soft medium, but we can also, once we get these wrapped into place, we can also apply a little bit of a flame to the pieces. We can burn the wet wood a little bit, and that gives us the opportunity to really kind of change the internal contents of the tissue that we're applying those temperatures to in terms of resin distribution and sort of a physical change of the wood that allows it to hold its position in that newly cemented sort of resin, liquefied resin as it solidifies, holding that location. That's kind of where I think we're going to be at with this piece. And just in terms of a need to be able to position it, but also bind that position. Once we establish that position, bind that position so that we hold that aesthetic into the tree. And I'm just getting rid of a few more pieces, and then let me go ahead and get rid of this foliage off of this piece as well. This is not going to do us any good, and I think turning this into deadwood is going to do us a lot more towards creating interest. Now, this is really where I saw the mame opportunity in this, because it's clear that the root system has been up-potted into a 1-gallon container. And just in teasing through it, I see that the trunk is halfway down. It's all very loose, incredibly loose soil, which means that it has not been around the roots. It's not occupied by roots. There's not a tremendous amount of resource occupation yet. And that's a perfect situation to find ourselves in if we're going to go ahead and we're going to kind of try to create a much smaller foliar mass. We don't have as massive of a root reduction as we would if it were a built-up nursery container. Again, the state of the material starts to perpetuate and propel our ideas for how it can be handled. I really like the idea of trying to create something ultra small, but it's all going to hinge on sort of how things work out and pan out as we create this deadwood and give shape to it. So let's just put a little bit of intention here And once we get this up into a nice position where we can start to establish an angle, a front, and a presence, then we'll circle back to how we handle the rest of the tree. Do it. It's so small and delicate that we might as well just go for it. And I think this, 12 feels a little underserving. Let's go with 10 on a tree of this size now. I could try and attempt, and we might get there when we see the rest of the trunk, to be able to alter the state of the position of the base. But I think where we're at this point is let's just go ahead and focus on getting the dead wood of a tree that we haven't, and this is a different sort of kind of working style and strategy than we typically employ. But I think this is also what a lot of you have asked us to do is like, hey, can you just work a straight up regular old plain standard piece of nursery stock? Don't air layer it, don't turn, an abnormal specialty conifer into a clump that demands. Like, just take a juniper and make it. And that was really the motivation with this too. I mean, I'm interested in a Shohin literati because I don't know that I have actually seen, I don't know that I've ever seen that. Maybe that there might be some counter to that in terms of like some hypocrisy in a Shohin literati because you're trying to draw out the length of a literati and you're trying to really keep the length of a Shohin completely under control. But I don't think so. I think it's still about essence. It's still about proportion. This is a very, very slender tree. And putting in the level of detail that I think we're working with here, I think this gives us the opportunity to explore some interesting things, okay? So I'm just going to go for it as far as raising these two pieces. And again, if we need to, maybe we put a thicker piece on the lower trunk when we kind of see it. But I would like to explore what can we do with not minimal or underserving degrees of detail, but just like what can we do if we keep it cool? Let's stay cool, man. Keep it cool. Keep it simple. What happens with this piece doesn't need to break new boundaries in bonsai. We're just playing with a really accessible piece of material. But I do like the extended deadwood. And I like the proportion of the deadwood. As far as the proportion of the deadwood pertains to the piece of material, watch closely here. We're just going to go up. Going to go up, incredibly flexible, right? And I love these proportions of the deadwood because now that deadwood becomes such an incredible character and defining piece to what we're dealing with. And now you start to see, okay, even if I have a really long trunk, I still have a nice little sort of, I have my apex here. Maybe this is my defining branch. Maybe I tuck these pieces in tight and I actually run out to the right. I could totally see that. Right? Maybe we elevate one of these pieces, we elongate, but notice the interesting movement that we already have in here. Okay. So now that I'm here, I can't really answer the question of the base. I don't like to pair repottings with stylings, but I think in this instance, in order to be able to do this tree justice, I need to see what's happening inside of the container. I've left myself an ample amount of foliar mass. I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna pull this piece out. I'm gonna tease out that actual base. I'm gonna repot this tree, and then I'm gonna finish the secondary, tertiary wiring that empower me to be able to do something here, okay? So let's just sort of rock and roll with the nuances of a piece of nursery stock that gives us this opportunity. Okay, and again, just to clarify, the opportunity that this piece is giving us is that it's been up-potted, very, very aggressive, abundant root growth over the year, but it's been up-potted, which is why it's got so much sort of looseness and mobility in the soil and the roots. These are very, very young roots. It's a very, very young tree. We can be a little bit more adventurous when we're dealing with younger trees. It's the older trees that we've got to be a little bit more careful of. Now, you might be saying, okay, so then what's the difference between young and old? I'm going to say that the threshold where a tree really crosses over into a different type of behavior is right around that 20-year mark. And you start to see a tree's vascular system shifting and solidifying and becoming a little bit more rigid, sort of in that 15-year mark. But I think you see a full-blown, pretty radical transition that occurs right around the 20-year mark of a lot of our nursery stock, a lot of our container-grown pieces of material, where the accumulation of all of the inputs that have gone into that system start to alter the vascular flow. And that's really, we talk about maturity as a human being. Obviously, we have sort of, growth as a measure of maturity, but you also have sort of a change of, to a degree, a change of, physiology, the way that your body metabolizes, the way that our joints accumulate scar tissue or impediments, become calcified, and all of a sudden we don't move as well. Inside of a bonsai tree is constantly being sort of injected with a really challenging amount of nutrition and toxicity and all of these sort of soil-borne resources that we feel and think very highly of, but have to recognize they're not always the best thing or the most appealing or the most ideal or the most healthy thing for the tree. Some of them are, and most of them are within a reasonable quantity. But when you get into this notion of abundance or of excess, that seems to be where we watch the tree need to be able to process that toxicity. That toxicity gets locked up in the resin, gets transported into the heartwood, and those lateral resources start to become vein-specific vertical movement of water and nutrition. Okay, and so in that we see the iconic and characteristic sort of vein-specific behavior of a juniper, right? But we also see an inability to be as aggressive and a singular working as we're being right now, going ahead and doing the styling and foliar reduction and then doing the root reduction at the same time. Okay, but this is a young tree still. Allows me to be a little bit more aggressive. I still have to be strategic. I still have to be respectful, right? I need to make sure I understand the shape of the root system. I cannot bear root. I must leave some portion untouched. I've got to save a lot of roots. I need the foliar mass to be able to help this thing recover, but I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to push in pretty far into the actual root system of the tree here to see if we can't get it down to an appreciable size. Now, somewhere in here, I'm actually now starting to understand that the base, and just be really aware of this, okay? The base of any tree has to have a flare point here, and you see this coming down. I took off roots above this. I took off roots here. I took off roots here. Now look at what I get. You're always going to get, and that's a big, long root. That's a character root that we're seeing here, okay? And I want to be careful to not mar it up too bad. But that piece, boom, that's your free radical from the seedling. This is your cotyledon from the seedling. This is your initial root, your tap root that any tree that's germinated from seed is going to put down to try and get down to a reservoir where it can sustain itself in potential drought conditions, right? That's that deep anchor root, the very first piece that emerges. What comes first, the root or the foliage? The root always comes first because it has to hydrate the foliage, and that's the first root that emerges from this junction right here where root and trunk or foliar mass start to diverge from each other. Okay. Now that I can see that though, before I actually anchor this thing into a bonsai container, I want to take this and I want to try to do as much of the disruptive wiring as possible. You can see the pieces of deadwood sticking out there. We see the opportunity to maybe swing back. That 3/4 cam is going to be awesome. Yes. Okay, you see that deadwood out there that's got interesting movement. I love the delicacy of it. You see the trunk, that inclination that's happening there. Let me just pick this out of the way, right? And we have that big, beautiful root. Look at that movement through there. Look at that movement through there. Now, if that branch comes back against the tree, apex comes back against the tree, and we shorten the foliar mass on this side of the tree, we've got a spectacular leaning tree with everything coming back. Simple material. We say tension as a design component is how we add interest to a tree to get that return, boom, on that tension. That's what's going to give us some drama in the design that allows us to compensate for the simplicity of the piece of nursery stock, okay? So before I put this into a container, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to give shape to these pieces that have secondary and structural repercussions so that once I pot this tree, I'm not sitting there jarring it inside of the containerized environment. Let me go ahead and do a little bit of structural wiring to give shape before we carry on with the repot. Shohin hitter. Okay, going through the process, very rapid process with a piece of nursery stock like this. You find your design, you get that structure, deadwood, whatever you're gonna do realized. We opened up the base, we saw that we had opportunities. You know, the abnormal part of this is pulling it out of the container, which is almost something I never do, but every tree has a little bit of a different process. We got into this circumstance where it's like it doesn't have stability, it's in a giant container, but it's clearly been up potted, the soil is loose. Maybe it'll do more damage than good to leave it in this nursery container. Let's go ahead and reestablish that balance of foliar mass to root mass that we're kind of looking for in the presentation and the execution of a tree like this, of this scale and of this size. But again, you know, seeing it now in a beautiful rectangular tom benda, the deadwood sticking up there, the little branching, very proportional to the tree, and a very fundamentally sound, informal, upright juniper bonsai. Nothing spectacular, nothing radical, nothing out of the ordinary, but taking a very humble piece of nursery stock and turning it into a great bonsai moving forward for the future. Blue rug juniper is a species of juniper widely available, widely distributed. And if you just take, this was the second tree I looked at in the nursery. There were 30 of these that were holiday adornments, right? And the second one I looked at, I said, oh, there's a zig, there's a zag, there's an interesting branch that I can turn into deadwood. I've got a great little juniper, small, proportional foliar mass, you know, informal, upright in its style and form. The tom benda pot matches it perfectly. Wonderful, fantastic little exercise to sharpen our blade, repurpose some of these really accessible price points that we find at nurseries over the holiday season, and just staying with the tradition of saying, hey, we appreciate you all very much. Hopefully this gives you a little bit of inspiration, and we wish you all the best at the end of 22 and entering 2023. Let's keep our eyes to the sky and optimism in our hearts, all right? I love you guys. Take care, be well, be safe. We'll see you on the flip side.